Hello everyone and welcome to Winging It, the F1 podcast. We're reviewing the Styrian Grand Prix that happened this weekend. With me, Adam Dickinson, are...
Me, Freddie Coates.
And me, Nigel Chu.
Very smooth to start off with. It was
as always
a dominant display over the Saturday and Sunday from Lewis Hamilton. He was never really... There was no one kind of really challenging him. Verstappen didn't have the pace and neither did Bottas. And he didn't lead every lap, but that was only because his and Bottas's pit strategies were a bit different. Bottas pit a bit later. So we'll get on to all the talking points from the weekend. Firstly, I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, for your driver of the day on Sunday. So Freddie, who's yours?
It would have been Perez until he clouted Hamilton.
Yeah, same. Everyone else.
Yeah. Their ordinary performance.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
I'll go with Perez, actually, to change it up. I did think he got it because the poll came out just before he clouted Albon, I think. So I think he definitely got the benefit of that. But I thought he had a good race. But let's start
solid third place and driver of the day for Verstappen, because he absolutely wringed the neck out of that.
He did. Although he did break his front wing, so I think it was him over the curbs at turn 7. I think it was 6 or 7. So yeah. That's the only thing for me that Verstappen did wrong.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah, well, let's start with that. Firstly, on Saturday, Hamilton put in one of his best qualifying laps that I can think of. He was 0.8 ahead of the next best driver.
1.2 seconds.
1.2. So, yeah, a really stunning display. He always goes well in the wet. He's one of the best work weather drivers, if not the best work weather driver ever.
Ever? Ooh.
Yeah,
big statement.
I'd put him up there. Would you say that pole lap is better than Singapore, the one where he just absolutely, it was expected that Ferrari would take it and he pulled out, the perfect lap to do that? Do you think it's better than that?
I think Singapore was more important, but this was equally as good in terms of the way he did it, because to adapt to the most difficult conditions, it's so hard. I mean, none of us have driven a F1 car, obviously, but just imagining it is just, we'll see. But yeah, to pull out that lap, and everyone talks about how good Verstappen is in the wet, but is Verstappen really anywhere near as good as Hamilton in the wet? I don't think he is, because Hamilton's just so good. When it rains, you just know he's going to be at the front. Because, I mean, Bottas, he was, 1.4 seconds behind on an 80-second lap as well, with only 8 or 9 corners. So, it was definitely one of his best laps in his whole career.
There are a couple of caveats to it, but I think it's undoubtable that Hamilton's lap was fantastic. We didn't see the outcome of Verstappen's final qualifying lap because he was really going aggressive, trying to get into the wheel tracks of Vettel, who was coming into the pits. And to be fair to Verstappen, he put his hands up. He could have taken the easy way out and said, "Oh, who was this guy on the line?" But he didn't. He was deliberately trying to get close to Vettel to get into the wheel tracks and he was on a very fast lap there, albeit absolutely wringing the neck out of it. It was a very scruffy lap, but there was speed there. Bottas was having brake glazing issues, I think they've put out a statement saying. So there were some brake issues for Bottas, but still, if he's safe enough to push the lap out, then 1.4 seconds clear of your teammate is insane.
I was very surprised that there weren't many only Giovinazzi spun in Q1, wasn't it? But no one else spun or crashed or anything. It was really impressive from the whole field, really. In really tricky conditions, because I think some people thought qualifying wouldn't even happen because it was raining really badly in the late morning. Yeah, but then They all went out there and everyone did a great job, but Hamilton was just
supreme
on fire. Yeah.
So you mentioned Bottas there. Where does he kind of stack up after this weekend? It was very optimistic after last weekend for Mercedes title fight. Kind of where do you see, will there be a championship fight? Will it just be between Hamilton and Bottas? Will Verstappen get involved as well? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I think on pure pace, there's between Bottas and Hamilton, despite what we've just said, in the dry, there is definite capability there for both drivers to win each race. We saw Bottas's pace last week, and in Hungary, Bottas last year out-qualified Hamilton, so he's got the pace at these tracks, Bottas. So relative to Hamilton, and I think so. If Bottas can clean up a few things, which I think last week alluded to that he had, then yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for a title fight.
For me, I'm going to be a bit more pessimistic and say no. And the main reason I'm saying that is because on Sunday, well, basically, whenever Hamilton is out in front, whenever Hamilton's in the lead, Bottas can never seem to have a go at him or challenge him for the win. Whereas last Sunday, Bottas was in the lead, yet Hamilton was able to challenge him. And without the safety cars, he may have even beat him with a different strategy, fresh tyres, etc. But then we saw on Sunday Bottas was behind. I think he was 7-8 seconds behind, but he never closed that gap at all in the race. And Hamilton probably had his engine turned down, was conserving his tyres, whereas Bottas was pushing to try and beat Verstappen, which he did. But he never really closed the gap or anything. So for me, that's the main difference. Bottas can only win if he's out in front and he's leading after the first lap. Whereas Hamilton, if he's behind, he can still win the race. So that's the big difference. So it's just race pace, I guess, and managing the tyres. Hamilton's just above Bottas in those two areas, which is why I think without any really bad luck, like in 2016, Bottas isn't really going to have a chance for me.
I'd echo that really. I'm sorry to be pessimistic, but I don't think, as you say, that if Hamilton gets into the lead, Bottas isn't taking that back.
I mean, has there ever been a race where Bottas has been behind and he's won the race? Because not that I can think of.
It's not.
I don't think.
USA.
Not off the top of my.
USA.
Apart from that one. But yeah, I think kind of Nico.
He came through at the end and overtook him at the back straight.
They're not on different strategies.
Yeah, they were on different.
Bottas was on a 2-stop and Hamilton was on a 1-stop. So
okay,
I think.
But I think looking at when Rosberg won, he pulled out. He was kind of borderline in every single area. I think, and I'm not sure Bottas has kind of that ruthless streak in him either, that he'd need to beat Hamilton.
Baku 2018, he should have won, and China 2018, he should have won, and he drove perfectly to outmaneuver in the pit stops the Ferraris and his teammate in those races, and it was only the safety cars that jeopardised both of those wins for him.
It wasn't back in 2018 he benefited from the safety car and then got a puncture. I'm sure he benefited because he pitted last.
I thought he took the lead already.
No, I'm sure the safety car, he benefited from it, but then he got a puncture.
He got the puncture,
Vettel was in the
he
lead.
should have won.
Yeah, but I think Vettel was in the lead. Anyway.
No, because Vettel dive-bombed him.
Yeah.
Vettel dive-bombed him and completely flat-spotted his tyre and then ended up in like fifth.
The safety car allowed Bottas to get ahead.
I thought because Vettel went long and Bottas...
No, Bottas went long.
Did he? Okay. Somewhat, okay.
I think,
I thought Bottas got ahead before the safety car. I don't know. I'm probably wrong.
Debating already.
I remember... I don't remember loads from the race or kind of as much as you do, but I do kind of remember when Bottas punctured, feeling like, he lost the win. It felt like he was in the position, but I'd have to go back because sometimes the mind does.
He'd been ahead of Hamilton all race anyway.
Yeah.
I thought he was third.
Oh,
I thought he was behind Hamilton.
Well, still, he should have won China. but then
Yeah.
Ricciardo pitted that.
Yeah, I know.
Without the Toro Rosso's crashing, without Pierre Gasly or Brendan Hartley dive bombing the other, Bottas would have won that.
And I think as well, consistency. Lewis, even on his bad weekends, he doesn't have bad weekends or bad results. Kind of Germany aside, that's the only one that I can think of in a long time. He did, and Bottas, he'll show absolute pace, but then sometimes he'll go missing. And I think that will be less of a problem because, as we've discussed, there's not as many drivers mixing it up with them. There's no Ferrari like there was last season. So it's just kind of how Verstappen, who loses out to Verstappen more over the race.
Yeah, I think the one thing that could help Bottas is if Mercedes are far out ahead, but Bottas will still be on the podium. His worst result should be a third or a second, maybe.
Yeah.
So then if Hamilton does have bad luck, he should be able to capitalise. Whereas, say, in 2018 and 2017, Bottas might have come fourth or fifth on a bad day because Ferrari was up there. So then Mercedes being dominant should help Bottas in a way.
Yeah.
And he should have the pace to block off a potential fastest lap gamble from Hamilton at the end, which would then be able to at least take a point away from Hamilton, maybe hand it to the midfield, but that's still away from his title challenger.
And I mean, to be honest, we've not had a title go down to the title decider on the final race since Rosberg, and I don't see that happening this year. I think it will be won before that.
Yeah, Bottas won't employ the same mind games that Rosberg did to such an effect.
Yeah.
Was it mind games or was it just bad luck for Lewis?
Well, if you think about something hard enough, it will happen. He clearly thought about that Malaysia engine problem.
I mean, I think it was kind of Rosberg was right on the edge of kind of legality in a lot of places, which you have to be. And he had to be, and he wouldn't have won without that. But I don't think Bottas has that in him. That's just from what I've seen of him. So he spent a good chunk talking about the lead in a race where there was no fight for the lead over the whole thing.
I think we've lost Adam there. I think Adam was going to ask about Verstappen, Freddie. So, what did you make of his weekend? He was reasonably good in qualifying, had that spin, but then he just didn't have the pace to take it to the Mercedes guys, did he?
Yeah, he didn't quite have the pace, but how long was he ahead of Bottas for? Was it 65 or something, about 71 laps? So he had an excellent drive to stay there and to completely outclass his teammate, who we've agreed a lot of the time isn't a slouch. Oh, Adam's back. There we go.
Hello.
Yes, we're just talking about Verstappen and how he tried to battle the Mercedes. What was really impressive was his overtake around the outside when Bottas passed him first time round. He somehow came back around the outside on old tyres. But then Bottas got on the next lap anyway. We don't know how much his front wing damage cost him in the race, whether that would have made a difference. I'm not really sure. But,
I think presumably not much, because Bottas was consistently closing in for the majority of the race. I think Verstappen's pace was always slightly off, and Bottas was just able to control when he mounted the challenge. But Verstappen was still able to remain in that fight for so long to force the challenge to come from Bottas that, that can only really be applauded for a stellar drive from him, I think.
So I think I froze after Verstappen, and then I carried on talking about Albon for about 10 seconds before realising that I dropped out. Alex Albon didn't have as good a race after kind of such optimism last week, and it kind of looked like he'd silenced a lot of critics for kind of his position in Red Bull, but he just wasn't on the pace of Bottas or Verstappen this weekend, was he?
He was obliterated, unfortunately. He was close in qualifying. Whatever, it was 4/10 off, which it's a short lap on off. Yeah, but he's still only a few tenths off Verstappen in the qualifying in the wet because of completed laps. He still got a lap in, so that's not to be sniffed at, which Verstappen didn't. But in the race, it was just a key thing with Pierre Gasly last year, which is why he was dropped, because he wasn't able to successfully play the rear gunner role. And you could kind of see that perfectly in Hungary last year. There's that Pierre Gasly wasn't there to pick up the pieces and it allowed a Mercedes late race challenge. Albon has been talked about, he's able to keep a bit of pace and mix it at the front a bit more. And towards the end of last season, he was, to be fair. But this race, he just puts himself in the same box that Pierre Gasly seemed to be in at the tail end of his Red Bull stint last year. And it doesn't look good, that performance for Albon at all.
Yeah, well, Gasly got lapped last year in Austria, didn't he, with no safety cars, so at least it wasn't that bad. 35, 40 seconds off the pace, It is not good. It seems to me, when at the start of the races, when the cars are heavy with fuel, that's where he's struggling. In qualifying, he's not too bad. He's there. He's about 3 or 4 tenths behind. And we saw in the second half of the race when the fuel was burning, on lower fuel, Albon was a bit better. His pace, in fact, when Perez was catching him, his pace shot up. So I don't know if it's a problem on heavy fuel or something for Albon, but it doesn't look good, and it does beg the question, how will he be with Red Bull next year or even later this season, really?
I don't know if he still has a spec difference to Verstappen. But then also, we don't know how much that's worth. I mean, it's a very visible difference on the front of the car to the sort of scoops in the nose. They've got a really good sort of cylindrical version on the front of Verstappen's car, whereas Albon's car is a little bit more blockheady. So we obviously have no idea how much that correlates, but
even you mentioned before last year towards the end when he was in the race, but even I'm thinking about Brazil before the safety cars, I don't remember him being that close towards the front. So I think circumstances have possibly helped. And same with Austria last weekend. He wasn't really in the race until the safety cars came. So then, and then we saw on Sunday in the normal race, he just doesn't quite have the pace. I'm just thinking, Adam, I guess this is a question for you. Is Verstappen going to make, does it matter who's against Verstappen, and Verstappen's just going to make them all look bad kind of thing?
Well, I mean, he beat Ricciardo, and I think Ricciardo was probably the best Red Bull could have hoped for in terms of a driver. I think if it wasn't for kind of the way they both came in that Ricciardo was there first, established himself as a dominant driver, and then Verstappen came in and kind of ended up beating him. But I think if that had kind of gone the other way, if Ricciardo had come in, in a kind of, once Verstappen was established, he could have been a good number 2 driver. That I think in terms of his level of performance is probably what they want. A driver who can, is decent, if not on Verstappen's level, close to, and just kind of able to pick up wins and podiums when he has the opportunity. But I don't know where else that's going to come from. Kind of looking at the Red Bull Junior program at the moment, that's a whole kind of other discussion in itself. But I'm just, I'm not. I think anyone up against Verstappen, I think even Hamilton up against Verstappen would have a difficult time. He's at that level, I think, and I don't know. I think once Ricciardo left, I'm not sure kind of who else they can get into to get to that level. I mean, on Drive to Survive, when Christian Horner was talking about axing Gasly, and he kind of said that the problem was he wasn't doing anything. He was kind of running around in, like 6th, 7th, 8th, and he wasn't kind of offering any sign that he'd improve on that. He was looking a lot at the data and stuff, and he wasn't driving off instinct. And I don't think Albon falls into that trap, but I'm kind of not seeing how Red Bull are gonna I think it's a very niche set of skills that they'll need from a driver to be able to fill in the dream number 2 role to Verstappen.
I think he is. Oh, go on.
He did the job, did Albon. He finished P4. Verstappen finished P3. That's objective met, really. Like you said about his pace, when Perez was attacking him, he picked up the pace. So, is it motivation? You get some. I mean, some drivers it's a bit more of a 70s, 80s thing, really. But like when they don't really sense the win, they can drop off, or sense a fight, they can drop off. And if Albon's mentally telling himself, I'm the 4th place finisher in this race, then he will drive to finish 4th, and that's it.
I think if he's thinking like that, that's a big problem, really, because you'd think they're all going for the win. And plus, if Racing Point, if Perez and Stroll started in the top 10, Albon probably would have got beaten, I think.
There's points to say they've got the 2nd fastest car, really, after that weekend.
Yeah, true. Albon is
under threat if Perez was starting in the position where he should have been, presumably around P5, P4 maybe.
Yeah. I think Albon is doing a better job than Gasly, but whether he's doing enough to keep his seat, that's the big question, really. Well, we're only 2 races in. We've got a few different tracks coming up, so we'll just have to see how he goes there. But he's going to have to start showing something, I guess, just showing more pace. He's definitely got the racecraft. I think that's a department where he's quite strong. But just raw race pace, that he needs to show something there.
Well, are they going to bring Sebastian home, as has been reported that Dietrich Mattis would like to happen?
I think Horner kind of shut it down on Thursday.
Shut it down, but it hasn't gone away. Apparently, Dietrich Mattis was out of the race, and I mean, they're not going to talk. They're They're cleverer than that, but that's what I heard.
Yeah, and they said Gasly would stay, would keep his seat for the whole of 2020. That didn't happen. And Christian Horner, I think the question was, will Vettel be at Red Bull? But they didn't say when. Like, Vettel might not be at Red Bull this year, but it could be next year.
So it's a white lie in Horner's,
exactly.
in Horner's mind.
Would Vettel do better than Albon or Gasly? I mean, 2020 or 2021 Vettel do better?
I think yes.
Mentally, he'd be in a much better situation at Red Bull. The Ferrari environment is a car crash at the moment, and I think the Red Bull environment.
A good bit of foreshadowing.
If he's in a team, that is now wants you out, a team that's just openly, essentially, oh look, we've usurped you with the younger driver. Bye. If you got then a whole corporation who absolutely adores you, saying, get him back, we want him here, which is the noises coming out from the top of Red Bull with Mateschitz, then that's going to just completely boost your confidence. And Vettel with a confidence boost would be a lot better. I think it would scare Verstappen more than any of the teammates he's had before.
I don't think he would. I think, he is a 4-time champion, but I don't think, so is Prost, but if he drove now, he wouldn't be at the level of a 4-time world champion. And I don't think Vettel is at that. I just don't know. I think Vettel, seeing how he's gone, especially against younger teammates, I don't really see any kind of promise there that he'd do any better. And it's not, if he goes, you know what his ceiling is. You don't know what Albon's ceiling is yet, because he's only been in for a year, and he's only been at Red Bull for a handful of races on the scale of. I don't think that'd be be a fun move, I guess, but I don't think kind of short term or long term that'd be the best for them. Nigel, what are your opinions?
Well, I think we can do a whole new episode on this, to be honest, because I think Vettel would be good enough personally, because he's shown he can do it. He can't do it at the moment with Ferrari, but if you simply ask me who would I rather have in the car, Sebastian Vettel or Alex Albon, I'd say Vettel every day. So that's
right.
Yeah, I think it's something we can definitely talk about.
Okay,
episode or something, because it's a pretty big topic.
Well, we've got obviously we'll be doing a preview podcast for Hungary, and then there's a week's break or a weekend free before it moves to Britain. So it's been a triple header, but there'll finally be a bit of a break, so that could be one on the schedule for then.
F1 news is like buses, isn't it?
We've got the notes for the podcast. we've got notes for the podcast, and for Ferrari we've just got old dear written down. Don't need to spend too much time on it because obviously there's a lot to get through, but just quickly, kind of what's the relationship? Has it broken down completely between Leclerc and Vettel, and was it all Leclerc's fault? Freddie, you had some thoughts on Ferrari last week, so I'm looking forward to this. That was after a second place, so I'm looking forward to what you think this time.
I ranted and raved about Ferrari last week, and I've sort of run out now. They qualified 10th and 11th this time, not whatever it was, 8th and 11th. I don't know.
Yeah.
The solace is that they're on pace with each other.
In the wrong direction.
They're on pace with each other, ish. They were saved from an embarrassing race by an embarrassing first lap.
Wow, that is something.
I didn't think how the race could have gone any worse, and I wrote this. That I don't think it could have got any worse. I can't envisage a situation that would have a worse race.
I think what's
Nigel,
worse for Ferrari as the mystique and global brand that is Ferrari, if they're happy to compete in a race where they're fighting for, well, presumably looking at where the Renaults were, presumably for around 8th and 9th with Sainz at the end of the race, presumably at a push. So if they're going to be doing that as a serious performance, then to not compete as a brand is better. And I'm not saying Ferrari should leave. I'm saying Ferrari should get better because they deserve to do better. No, they should do better. They don't deserve to do better at the moment. They should do better. But whenever they perform, it is embarrassing. And they brought forward some of their upgrades, but they never finished above, 8th in a practice session this weekend? At least they got second place in a race and 4th in a practice session last week. It was this weekend, it was dire. Again.
Yeah, I do think next weekend at the Hungaroring, a less kind of pace-heavy or straight-line speed-heavy track, they could do a bit better, and there's a few other teams that I think will be in that boat, but we'll have to see. I don't think we really got a true representation of where the upgrades have put them. It's one track, it's practice, and only 2 practice sessions at that, and a wet qualifying, and then they didn't set a lap in the race, so we'll see. But Nigel, is all trust and is the relationship between Vettel and Leclerc completely broken down?
No, I don't think it has. I think it's just more they know Vettel's going out on the team, and Vettel seems to not really care, to be honest. He doesn't seem motivated. He's speaking freely, whereas Leclerc knows he's going to be with Ferrari for at least 2 or 3 years. I think he's contracted for. So I think the relationship between Vettel and Leclerc is fine, but what's more important is the car performance. And we've suggested that Ferrari, they'd have more downforce this year, but even in the wet, even if they did have a dry setup, if there is such thing as a dry setup these days, they were pretty poor. And in the rain, obviously, that's when downforce matters the most. We'll have to see what happens in Hungary this weekend, but I think we're just going to have to adjust to Ferrari being the 4th, 5th, or 6th fastest car, because for so long they've been at the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. And this is the new normal for them now.
They've never, or not in a long time, I think, since I started watching in 2007, and obviously before that in the Schumacher years, but I can't remember a time when they've kind of been in the midfield. They've always, I think, 2014 wasn't a great year for them, but they've always kind of been a step of other midfield to my memory. But yeah, I think it will be kind of Leclerc, Ricardo, Norris, Sainz, kind of, and all the other drivers there going up against each other in kind of more equal cars. We'll get onto the midfield battle now because we spent half the episode talking about the front. So, God knows how long we're going to talk about this.
Ferrari, yeah.
So it was crazy at the end. I think last week there was 4 or 5 cars in the podium positions, or in second and third over the last few laps, and this week that kind of shifted down a bit. But firstly, who was out of that midfield of, I guess, the 2 Renaults, the 2 Racing Points, and the 2 McLarens? Who stood out? I mean, I've already said Perez, but who to you stood out as the best driver?
As the best driver?
Of the race, yeah.
Yeah, still Perez. Although Ricardo, I thought, did put in a good showing at the start of the race on the medium tyres.
Yeah. We all had mistakes throughout the weekend, whether it was in qualifying or the race. There was no one who really shone for me. Carlos Sainz got done with his pit stop because he had a 12-second pit stop. So that didn't help. So I think Norris's performance was really good, especially those last 10 laps again. But I think Sainz's performance wasn't as bad as people think because it wasn't his fault that the pit stop went wrong. Renault looked good, actually, in the first half of the race. But then on the other set, I think they went to soft tyres with Ricardo. They didn't look good. And McLaren seemed to have a really good qualifying car or a good car on low fuel because Norris really came fourth in the back end of the race there. And in qualifying, Sainz was third, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it looks like Racing Point's the opposite. They're not as good in qualifying, but then they're really good in the race. So then those strengths and weaknesses there are going to make for a fantastic fight throughout the next few races, really.
I think the McLaren has got insane drivability. It's such a driver-friendly car that when it's on low fuel, they can just really just absolutely maximize all the pace easily in low fuel. Whereas I was saying this to Adam earlier a few times, the Racing Point looked a touch skittish in the race, and that wouldn't have helped them in the wet, and that wouldn't have helped them in the wet, which it didn't. And they just looked like a lot of the attacks, particularly from Stroll and Perez coming through, they had to be lunges, and that's the nature of the midfield. But the lunges they did just seemed to be completely ragged for a lot of the time.
The drivers, though.
Well, if it's the drivers, then that's still the case.
Well, on that, just on that, McLaren switched their 2 drivers in the latter stages, and that absolutely paid dividends for them. It's one of the best team moves I think I've seen in a while, in that it got Lando 5th place and it got Sainz the fastest lap. And I think, firstly, that just shows kind of how good the relationship between the 2 drivers is and the whole team. It, really got a feel with atmosphere. But Perez and Stroll kind of wasted valuable time fighting between each other, I think at several points in the race between pit stops and whatever. So it's impossible to kind of extrapolate how it would have worked out if Racing Point had pulled the same move or anything like that. But I think that, could well have been the difference at the end. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I was impressed with Stroll mixing it with Perez. I thought, go on, son. We haven't seen much of him. I mean, with his racing, he's good. He's a good racer. He's got good racecraft.
I disagree.
Oh, okay. I thought he was all right. I enjoyed his race.
He spent a lot of time behind Ricardo, didn't he? I don't think his racecraft is one of his biggest weaknesses, to be honest, because he spent a lot of time behind Ricardo when he could have got past much earlier on, then pushed forward and possibly got a 5th place, but he didn't. And his move on Ricardo as well was, to me, he should have got a penalty for that because there was no way he was making. Yeah, he forced Ricardo off the track, so
he shouldn't have.
That's a penalty.
I thought it was fun. I enjoyed it.
If you can lunge up the inside and force the other driver to not make the corner, then it's just going to be silly watching people dive bomb from so far back and not allowing the other driver to turn in because you forced them off the track. So for me, that's a clear penalty, and how he got away with it, I don't know, but that's just my rant at the stewards.
I suppose the penalty is that he was then attacked by Norris.
Yeah, but that's because he went off the track and also took Ricardo with him out into a different country.
To Narnia.
I think on its own, kind of the incident on its own, I maybe lean towards not giving a penalty, but I think what Nigel said about the precedent it sets, and this is kind of what I said last week, but a lot less eloquently last week. That I'd rather see kind of clean racing, less racing that's cleaner, and like Nigel said, if drivers see that's allowed, and especially Ricardo, next time he's especially behind one of the racing points, they better watch their inside, because he'll think, if that's the kind of status quo of what's allowed, then but I'll have a bit of that.
I just don't get how how Hamilton, for example, got a 5-second time penalty and 2 penalty points on his license for something that was clearly accidental, whereas Stroll dived it. Oh, go
on. Well, I think for that, and I don't think it's right, but I think that was based on the consequence of it, that Albon got knocked off the racetrack.
Because say Ricardo turns in and make contact. Oh, so then Stroll gets a penalty. It shouldn't be like that. It should be it shouldn't be about the consequence for me. Because for Stroll to get a penalty, it means Ricardo intentionally has to turn in, make contact, and the should go, oh right, you should get a penalty. But Ricardo didn't want to make contact, so then.
Yeah, I mean, if that happened, Ricardo would be criticised for drawing the foul, essentially like diving in football, and you get booked himself.
Yeah. So that's
I get where you're coming from, Nigel, to be fair. I enjoyed Stroll's race. I really enjoyed watching him fight with people, and I think I liked the fact that he came back at Perez. I think I appreciate what you're saying, actually, about him being stuck behind Ricardo for way too long. I don't want to decry a second last lap lunge, but now you say it, he did get Ricardo off the track. I'm trying to picture it in my mind. I've only seen it the one time, but I think, I don't know, it was just, apart from that bit then, most of the race I thought for Stroll was really good.
I thought there was a couple, I think it was more Perez, but for several, we've mentioned Bottas and Verstappen, but kind of from turn 4, kind of through sector 2, there were some brilliant kind of wheel-to-wheel battles. I think Perez took on Sainz and Stroll through there. I think there was some great racing through that section of track, which I really enjoyed as a fan.
The DRS felt a bit too powerful when the move was on. Although, as we just said about Stroll not being able to get the move done, that kind of makes that redundant. So there's a whole big weird debate. But it seems to give me the impression that when a move was on, the majority of the time it was done before the braking zone of turn 4, which got a bit tedious for the moves, I'd have to say. It was more prevalent in probably the Formula 2, but anyway.
Yeah, Gasly really suffered from that. I think early in the race, there were like 4 or 5 overtakes off the top of my head where they just kind of overpower him on the straights. But I think it depended largely on how, because Austria's got 3 DRS zones back to back. But I think it also depended how the driver took the corner, because I think for the more kind of aggressive defenders or attackers, then that was actually where you got the big flowing battles through the next sector. But the good news is we're going to Hungary next, which is completely different. So
Ocon impressed me when he defended really aggressively from Ricardo going into that corner. Who else was good there? Russell scrapped with Magnussen, but then he got forced out wide, which then compounded Williams' race, didn't it?
Who was Perez? I can't remember. I think it was Perez overtaking someone.
Around the
This is great
outside.
analysis.
Yeah.
Well, it might have been Stroll actually, where he got the DRS and kind of got up and actually overtook him and kind of moved back in, and the other driver tucked into his slipstream, but then kind of dived out up the inside. So he kind of let him pass on the straight and ducked back into his slipstream, but then made a late braking move into the corner.
It was on Sainz.
Kind of that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah, Jack Nicholls put out a tweet. BBC F1 Jack Nicholls put out a tweet today saying that it was one of the best overtakes he's seen in Formula One, and Verstappen's defence as well
indeed.
was. Yeah, very high praise.
Because we don't get much overtaking in F1.
Particularly around the outside.
You mentioned Renault. I thought it was a very good weekend for them. They've shown some tangible evidence that they are in the midfield fight. Freddie shaking his head and making kind of weird facial expressions at me. But Ricciardo, if it wasn't for the kind of dive bombs from Stroll, he could well have taken the 5th place from Perez, and that would have been the best result second best result of his Renault career, I think. And Ocon was kind of showing good pace. He got into Q3 and qualified 5th. I think it was a good weekend for them after a difficult year. Obviously they got to back that up. But Freddie, what are you thinking on that?
I don't think it was the best race for Renault. They've got, Ocon, they're qualified. They both cars into Q3, very good. Especially Ricciardo after his crash in FP2. Wonderful. Ocon qualifying P5. Wow, look at that. Brilliant. And then in the race, Ricciardo finishes, 8th? And Ocon retires with an overheating issue, which is the same issue that Ricciardo retired with last week. So they've got niggles to get on top of, but then they're forcing them out of the race. And it was the pure driver's skill of Ricciardo to be able to negotiate his battery and all of that on old soft tyres to force Stroll's attack to be so aggressive. It was only the skill of Ricciardo that saved him in the points, really, I think, this weekend. I thought, and Ocon potentially as well, but it would have been around 10th. Kvyat was 10th. It would have been that position for Ocon, presumably, just because he was dropping off on the pace. And before he retired, I think Renault, if they want to be a solid midfield contenders, they seem to be just a touch off Racing Point and McLaren. They've got a strong driver lineup, but other than that, I don't really think Renault did have the best week. They had it was below par, I think, actually, for Renault.
I think the result was below par, but the potential shown was pretty good. I'd go with that. Nigel? What?
Yeah, this was Renault's worst track last year. So if this is Renault's worst performance this year, I think that stands them in pretty good stead for the rest of the season, I think. Because, like I said, they were weak here last year and they were a bit better this year, it seemed. Reliability, I think, could be the biggest problem. It still seems that they're having these failures which are costing them massively. They need to put a clean weekend together, really, to build up the points. But it was okay for Renault, and I definitely think there's more to come for them, just simply because they'll fare better on other circuits.
Yeah, that's fair. And rounding out the top 10, Freddie mentioned previously, was Danny Kvyat for AlphaTauri. I think that's a great result for him. I think Alpha are slower than, I'd say they're probably the 7th, if I've got my maths right. I think they're faster than Williams, Haas and Alfa Romeo. So I think, picking up points so far in both races is a pretty good return for them, and they seem to kind of have their act together in that they're able to pick up points when the teams that are faster than them falter so far. So I think it was a good, and especially for Kvyat, he's been under pressure from Gasly ever since he came back to Toro Rosso, really. So yeah, good result for him to get 10th. If you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, it was good for Kvyat to get 10th. It was a very strong drive because he was quite low on the grid and he sort of plugged away at the race and just got there, got into P10, got the point, brought it home. Tick, tick, tick. But it was a sad race for Gasly because he qualified well, he started well, but it's just the soft strategy.
Yeah.
He went back onto the softs just because the hards weren't. He just couldn't get the hards working, but he needed to make it work. And they eventually put him on the softs just to get some pace because, I think it was in the 60s lap numbers where he finally got past Latifi and Russell.
I think the reason Gasly used the hard tyres was because they needed to do something different, really, against the other midfield teams because they don't quite have the pace of McLaren, Renault, and Racing Point. So they tried something different. It didn't work, and yeah, I think the problem AlphaTauri have is that they don't quite have the pace, and they seem almost in no man's land. They're not with Haas and Williams, but equally they're not with Renault, Racing Point, and McLaren. So they're just going to have to take opportunities, I guess. Yeah, they're just going to be battling for 1 or 2 points. It looks like. I don't see them in the top 6 at any point this year unless we get a crazy race again.
Yeah, I don't think I think, as you say, they're in a bit of no man's land. They're not in the midfield battle, but I think that'd still be a good season for them if they can, pick up points as they've done so far, kind of, make it into the points. And, I do think if there is a crazy race, they'll be in a decent position to capitalise on that. Just from what I've seen, they seem to be a good unit. It was kind of, once Gasly pit, it was kind of, he dropped down the order and kind of out of consciousness with all of the stuff going on in the midfield, and it kind of seemed weird to see where it went wrong for him. But a good result in qualifying, and I think he'll still be strong over the season, as will Alpha. Have either of you got anything you want to say on the rest of the field?
Well done to Haas for finishing the race. That sounded mean, but genuinely, they've had so many issues recently.
Yeah.
They haven't got a car out in Q1 in both races. As in, one has gone out, the other hasn't. Or has had brake issues. And it's a horrible thing to have, is brake issues. I think, especially the Haas, considering they had brake issues a few years ago with Brembo and so on. So their supplier and their integration seems to be an issue for them, and it's something that's plagued them for ages. So they're going to be so frustrated that they just can't get on top of that because they want to be able to bring the car forward. They want to be able to get on top of all these issues and bring the car forward because they can do it. They're a really, really good team. They work bang for their buck really well. And it's just, I want them to do well. I like the people there.
They've got the Ferrari engine, though. It would same with Alfa Romeo, and it's the first time there's been no Ferrari-powered cars in the top 10 since Mexico 2015, which says a lot, really.
Wow.
So yeah, Alfa and Haas. I don't know how much of it is the engine, how much it's other stuff, but it looks like it could be a long year for all of the Ferrari-powered teams.
Yeah,
I think Magnussen especially. I like him in terms of what he brings. He's a good racer, but they're just not kind of getting any results at the moment. And it's happy that they finish, but equally, it's not what they'll be wanting. Kind of was it 12th and 13th? Isn't they won't want that to be the ceiling for them and kind of the benchmark of a successful weekend. Williams, I think. Just touching on them briefly, the opposite of AlphaTauri in that even when they kind of get a good position, they don't seem to be able to pull anything off. It was a shame for Russell that he span out so quickly. I don't think they would have made the top 10 on pace anyway. but kind of
he could have made it hard over
you know,
a few others to get there.
Yeah, and I think they just maybe need a bit of nous to get themselves in those positions, being in the right place at the right time for that. And Alfa Romeo, I think, are the only other two we've not mentioned. We'll probably talk about those a bit more in the general podcast that we'll do after Hungary on kind of where the future lies for them. So that's the race covered. It took us 50 minutes, but it was an entertaining race, especially at the end, with a lot of talking points as usual. We'll move on to F1 Fantasy, which we didn't mention last week, but we are all doing F1 Fantasy this season. And we're in a league with us three and some of the journalism friends that we have. And yeah, it was a better week for me this week. But if we start with Austria, I'm just going to pick that up now. So my team is Hamilton, Norris, Perez, Stroll, Verstappen, and the team is set as Racing Point, which wasn't a very good decision for last week. It was good in the qualifying, but in the race, Stroll retired, Verstappen retired, Perez kind of didn't mix it as high as I thought he would. It was a good weekend for Norris, and Hamilton didn't win the race either. So that wasn't great. How was your guys' weekends in your fantasy teams for Austria?
I did awful in Austria. So I think I only got 40 odd points or something. But so I changed my team afterwards. I've got Russell in there, and I've also got Mercedes as the team card, whatever you call it. And I've put Norris. Yeah, I don't think I had Norris before, so I put him there as well. So I've completely changed my team, and it's given me a good result for the Styrian Grand Prix. So yeah, I don't. To be honest, I don't really know how this game works. So I'm just
there's a lot of
as well.
There's a lot of kind of bonus points you can get, and you've really got to sort of think about. Like, I don't want to have anyone in the same team with each other, because then if someone out-qualifies,
I think that's where I went wrong.
You'll get the point for the amount qualifying, but then you'll lose the point because they were out-qualified. So, and they do minus points and so on. Because my Austria lineup has stayed the same. I kept it the same. Got Perez, Hamilton, Sainz, Giovinazzi, Verstappen, and Racing Point as the team. And there was a few. I had good drives in Austria, apart from for Verstappen, who let the side down.
Wasn't his fault
with his retirement. He let the team. He let Formula One down. But then for how do I change this on my computer? Oh well, I'm just going to go on memory now. I can't see it anymore. I got about 130 odd points for that race, but then I got about 180 for this race, just going with the same lineup. I think I was saved a bit by Perez coming through the field, and by Verstappen and Hamilton's podiums. And a decent qualifying performance of the majority, apart from Giovinazzi. So I think it's going okay. But Azim, you're the one with the team that is a few points ahead of us.
I am first in our league, yes. So I've kept the same lineup. I was thinking along the same lines as you about not having teammates, but I think Stroll, he was rated at 7.8 million, which seemed like an absolute bargain for the other drivers that are around that level. So I've put him in, and if we go to the Styrian Grand Prix, I got 211 points, which has catapulted me up the order into first place, which I've now not got up on the leaderboard. But we are all in our journalism league. We are all at the top. We're in the top three, which is nice.
We're going to do a Hungary preview podcast later on this week, and we're going to then go over all our sort of predictions for the race then, and who we think will come out on top in Hungary for finally a race at a different track this year. It feels weird to leave Austria, but anyway, that's what we're going to do.
We need to talk about the return of a certain two-time world champion as well, so we can talk about that next time. What whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, because it seemed to divide. It seems to have divided opinion in the F1 community, as it seems.
Yeah.
So yes, there always lots to talk about in F1, which is the great thing.
Yeah, I'll move on from that quickly. Otherwise, we will get entrenched in debate here now. So you can find us on Acast, which is our podcast provider. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on YouTube if you want to see our beautiful faces. But presumably, you already have listened to this because you're at this bit. So I'm just reminding you how you got here. But well done. So yes, we've got our Hungary preview podcast coming up later this week, and then we've got the Hungarian Grand Prix. So that'll be brilliant, hopefully. All right. Bye, guys.
We'll see you for that.